Hi everyone, Simon from Horoma Studio. I see a lot of people complaining about their clients' feedback on social media or joking about how their clients ruin their images. And I myself used to have kind of a problem dealing with some feedback from clients sometimes due to a lack of experience. And so I thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about in a sort of short video today. The idea will be to sort of clarify first what kind of mindset we should have when dealing with clients' feedback, and more importantly, how to deal with them productively and professionally. So let's have a look at that. So first we need to clarify what is poor feedback from a client, basically. There are many different types of feedback that could be considered poor or not really useful. So I'll just go through a kind of short list in order to give you a nice overview of what it can entail so that you can know if it sort of falls into what you have in mind or not. The first one is basically no feedback. When your client is literally not answering any of your emails or any of your calls and you're basically just pushing the project into the dark and not knowing what they're thinking. Another one that can also fall into bad feedback is when an email is written with basically no discussion and every decision is taken without consulting you. So this is also quite bad. Can also lead to a lack of information where basically they're giving you really rough direction that are not clear enough for you to proceed clearly toward the second step or third step or whatever milestone you have. The other extreme is when basically it's becoming too specific and decisive, where they're giving you very specific things to change in your image and where you might actually not agree with it. This is kind of the next type, where it's making you do things that don't really make sense. Taking directions that don't make sense according to the prior direction that you were that you agreed on taking earlier. Then there's sort of feedback that is very common, where you would feel they're ruining my images, where basically they're making you adding things or changing things in a way that sort of make the image look less good than you think it was before, and you can't really understand the justification for it. And one last type of feedback that I have in mind regarding that, one that I haven't really experienced, to be honest, but that I know exists, is when you have a client literally giving you very harsh feedback, just telling you everything looks like shit, or yeah, you did a very poor job at doing what they were after. So once we sort of identified that this is sort of feedback that we received, there's a kind of a 3-step process that is very easy to go through, I think, and that helps in understanding and sort of clarifying how to deal with it properly. So let's go through that now. The first big step of this 3-step process of giving a right feedback or answer to bad feedback is to assess if the problem stems from is it your fault or maybe you're wrong. Because the good thing is that sometimes you're wrong, and it's actually easier to address because you're the one who needs to change something, and changing stuff you did is actually easier than changing your client's idea about something sometimes. So one thing I think to address that at first is to understand that you shouldn't take feedback personally, but take them professionally. So this is something I know is quite hard for artists, is that you're not supposed to, it's very hard to sort of differentiate from the person because this is your own thing and your sort of own work, but still you have to sort of look at it very bluntly and from sort of different perspective in order to make sure that you actually are looking at it in a sort of unbiased way. Because one thing that we need to understand is that sometimes you might be wrong, and it's important to always take responsibility for what could maybe indeed be your fault. So once you assess if actually it is your fault, then it's easier to deal with it. This is one thing I noticed with this sort of idea of my clients ruin my images, is that it's kind of symptomatic of a mindset where one thinks that he or she can't be wrong when making images, and that all the decisions you're making are actually always good, and that and that the client is kind of always wrong and it just doesn't understand you. What it means essentially is that the goal you set yourself in thought you reached by making a nice image is actually not the same goal that your client has or had with the image. So what it means is actually you failed to align your mindset and your goals with your client's ones, which is essentially what you should do at first, is to make sure that what you're striving to create in terms of visuals is exactly doing the effect that your client is after. Because if you're sort of like hitting the target, but it's not the same target as the one your client set for you, then for sure there's going to be a misalignment and some sort of miscommunication. The client also is something that needs to be acknowledged, and that sometimes I think is very weird to see that visualizers are not very paying attention to it, is that sometimes the client might be right. Because we tend to default that the idea that the client is always wrong and has, like, since they don't really have all the knowledge we have about image making, then it means that all the ideas that they'll have and that they'll throw at us will necessarily be bad ideas. The thing is that it couldn't be further from the truth. The thing is that you also need to really take the time to analyze why they're proposing something different, and how you could potentially integrate it into something that works better if you feel that their idea is not that good. There was one time, for instance, I won't go into very much detail in there, but I had a set of images to do, and my client was really pushing for a very specific point of view camera that were on the sort of limit in between two spaces all the time. So there were very simple frontal views that were, like, graphically speaking, very appealing. The thing is that I was telling them that for normal people, like layperson and not architect, it would be hard sometimes for some spaces that we were depicting to understand exactly the relationship that was created. So the good thing, or not the good thing, but to sort of explain the process, is that what I did, instead of thinking my client is forcing me to do something that doesn't work, is that I sort of found a way that made it work, because conceptually speaking, their ideas were very compelling. So what I did was to sort of find a way in terms of imagery to translate that idea. And it just actually needed a few refinement of the camera position and a few refinement of the model to make them much more visible and understandable, even for people that would be not architect and that wouldn't be very aware of, like, how space worked, basically. So, and this in the end led to a very, very compelling result, whether it was considered on a visual point of view or on an architectural communication point of view, which is kind of like what I would call a successful image, where you manage to have, like, a good looking image that properly convey the ideas of the architectural concepts. One thing also regarding this whole thing is to understand that when it might be your fault, you have to sort of understand where it stems from, because your clients are generally not really aware of anything if you don't provide them the information. So you have to make sure that sometimes, as I said, it can come from your fault. It can be, for instance, a problem of lack of clarity in the process, because the client doesn't understand your work and what to expect from the different versions you're sending, or like the different type of, like, the way you're working in general, basically. So you have to make sure that you're clarifying this, because otherwise you can't really bitch about your client not understanding your process if through all the exchanges that you had, you never really clarified how you want to work. There's also a kind of lack of clarity in your expectations, because if you don't clarify to your client what type of feedback you want, when you want it, and how it's supposed to be sent to you, you can't really complain for your client to not do anything. Because if they don't know in the first place what they're supposed to send back to you regarding the image that you sent, it makes sense that they won't really know what to do and will just do what they feels right. There's also potentially a problem in the lack of clarity in their expectations. And this, you have to basically make sure to always ask questions and make the brief as clear as possible. If you don't know where to aim, you won't reach the goal, basically. But this is, even though we could think that this is the client's work to give us all the information, you actually have to be the one who understands all the amount of information that you need, and to ask expressly your client all the information, so that you have the clearest idea of their vision of the project and of all the necessary documents that they have. You literally have to know inside out their project and their vision of the project, and not just have like some plans in 3D and just go with it, because this is literally your fault if you're not asking for more material to start from. Also, and this is one big thing that I think sometimes people misunderstand, is that you can have a sort of lack of clarity in your work when you're presenting it. I even have like people that don't present their work at all. What you need to do is to present your work and explain your process for the client to understand all your decision process, so that basically every time you took a decision, you can justify it, and you can justify it to your client and explain them why you did things that way and not another way. That way they will be more into the process of making the image, and they will be less prone to asking for changes, because you sort of are already one step further than they are, and you're already sort of addressing objections that they could have, because you can say, here's the point of view I think we should go with, because I tried this one and they don't work. Or I tried like the actual ones that you proposed and I think it doesn't work, because based on what you said we should show in the image, this image is working better. And once you use all this sort of like unbiased approach and justification, there really is very few clients that will still make you go for another type of point of view, because they generally want the best for their project. And if you show them that you care about their project and not just your own portfolio, then you'll be able to sell them better your ideas, because they actually convey their ideas. The big step, once you've addressed if this is your fault or not, is then to address the problem. As I said, if it's your fault, it's actually easier to address it, because it's just like the changes will come from your side, so it's easy. If the problem really comes from your client and then you need to sort of change things, then it's a little bit different in the way you should address it. But overall, the ways to sort of tackle these problems are always the same. I won't go into details of like all the many situations that can exist, because there are as many situations as there are like clients and projects. But the whole point, I think, is always to reframe a bad situation into a good situation in your eyes and in your client's eyes. In your eyes, it's easy because it really is just a mindset shift. It's like maybe you misunderstood something and you just need to sort of start again and sort of reframe the way you're seeing the project and sort of make sure your goal aligns with your clients. So the easiest way to do that is actually to just ask for more clarity. Ask why your client replied the answer with such poor feedback in general. Is like explain why they're going that way, why they have bad idea of how the thing is going so far, and why they don't feel like it's going in the right direction. And basically this is something that is basically clarifying the brief, but this is something you should have done way earlier. But you can still always sort of refine it after. It's fine. But it's something you need to address as early as possible. You also need to clarify your need for constructive feedback and sort of clarify what constructive feedback is. So you literally need to explain again what you need. It's easy to actually sort of reframe everything, because once you explain to the client that you really are after the same goal and that you might have misunderstood what they wanted and that you just want them to re-clarify their position, then you can sort of start almost from scratch again and tell them, okay, now I understand what you want. Let's go that way, and I'll sort of fine tune what I've done so far so that we can have a better proposal for your project. One thing also that is important is to sort of propose a solution to orientate their research if you feel like their option is not that good, because sometimes you will get feedback where the client is asking for another point of view and you know it doesn't work. What you want is to be able to sort of still build up their proposal, but still propose other things that might work better and explain them. If in the past you didn't take the actual time to explain what your process was and what your thinking was, this time you would take the extra time to explain why their point of view is actually less good than the one you were going for, or whatever topic it was. But really this idea of comparing and explaining as thoroughly as possible, without technical jargons and stuff like that, because you don't want to take your client from like above and say, I know more than you do because this is wrong. What you want is just to show that you care about the end result and that you want the end result to be as close to their point of view and their vision of their own project as it's possible. And also one thing I think that is important is to really, as much as possible, if something feels like there's a sort of hierarchy problem, is to reframe all the sort of project and the relationship around collaboration rather than some sort of hierarchy thing. You really want to show your client that you care about their project, but that you don't want them to sort of, you don't want you to feel just like you're pitching ideas. You want to explain them, you want to collaborate, you want to show you're working together and you're on the same team. You don't want to just be like presenting stuff and waiting on their feedback, because this is a very underperforming way of building images for whatever project. Last step of this 3-step process that is very straightforward, as you have seen, I think, how to prevent it from happening again, because basically we always make mistakes and we always learn from them, but what you want to make sure is that you do learn from them and that you implement your learning into your next process and next projects. So in order to prevent that from happening again, I think there are like 2 main things that are to be done. The first one is to clarify your process as early as possible. Even if you can, it's better is to have like an actual meeting with the client to just clarify your process, expectations, the way you work, the milestones you think you have, and the sort of feedback you need, etc. And basically your overall philosophy of work, I'd say. And you need to do that before with just the client and not doing it in the middle of a project. So this is something you have to really do every time, especially with new clients when you actually don't really know how they work and what they are expecting. You don't want to enter a new project with a new client that you've never worked with and not even know what to expect from them, and don't have them not knowing what to expect from you. And the next big thing, I think, but it sort of links back to several articles and videos that I did in the past regarding how to sort of like sort out your clients, is that you shouldn't feel the urge to work with everyone. There are like many clients out there. Some of them will be perfect fit for you. Some of them will be absolutely bad fit for you. And you shouldn't force yourself to work with clients that don't fit your requirements and process, because it will only lead to very negative consequences. And also like the sort of frustration that you build by working with clients that are actually not really working the way you want will sort of also influence in a bad way the way you will work with your client that you actually enjoy with, because you'll have this sort of like frustration that you're building up, and you'll have this sort of like lack of trust every now and then that can build up, which is not very good. So this is why it's really important to clarify the whole process and make sure that you're very careful when you choose your new clients, and that you don't jump into new collaborations all the time without double checking at least the basics, I may say. So that's all with this 3-step process that is pretty straightforward, I think. Dealing with clients is basically based on 2 main skills, I'd say. The first one is having a strong knowledge not on how you do things, but on why you do them, and having a strong process and clear communication to your client in order to explain this why. These are 2 aspects that are cornerstones of the composition masterclass that I've started running recently. So if you want to have a look at the course and maybe enroll in the next cohort and straighten those aspects, check out the link in the description. The landing page is quite thorough and sort of like explains really properly what to expect from the course. Either way, next time you have crappy feedback, make sure to first assess your part of responsibility in the problem and sort of address it as professionally as possible by asking the right questions. And once you identified if you messed up and where you messed up or how to address it, you can very easily fix it usually. So because the goal is becoming clearer for you. One thing you need to make sure as well is to take the appropriate measures so that this doesn't happen in the future again on next contracts. So it does take both soft and hard skills to deal with clients efficiently. So good luck guys, and see you next video. Cheers.